The government in the Maldives bans a campaign called India Out. It's critical of New Delhi's military presence and political influence in the country. But what's behind this campaign, and what does that mean for the close ties between India and the Maldives? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. India out, that's the slogan some opposition parties in the Maldives have been repeating for more than 2 years now, claiming the government is selling their country to India. The campaign, now banned by the government, started in 2020 as street protests, quickly gaining traction on social media. Those behind it say they only oppose India's small military presence in the Maldives and are not against trade, cultural and other ties. A coalition of opposition parties led by former President Abdullah Yameen accused the government of signing secret deals with New Delhi, allowing Indian troops to be permanently stationed in the Maldives. But there's also a wider geopolitical side to this, as the Maldives has emerged as an important battleground for competition between India and China in South Asia. In November, the government issued the following statement. The government of Maldives strongly rejects attempts to spread false information through media and across social media platforms using the so-called India Out slogan, alleging that bilateral cooperation between the governments of Maldives and India undermines the national security and sovereignty of Maldives. Support provided by India on areas such as search and rescue capabilities, casualty evacuation, coastal surveillance, and maritime reconnaissance directly benefit the Maldivian people. India's presence in the Maldives has been so far limited, while cooperation between the two nations goes years back. New Delhi had donated 2 helicopters and a Dornier aircraft to Maldives to help with medical evacuations and sea surveillance. 75 Indian personnel are stationed in Maldives at the moment to maintain and operate the aircraft. The two countries are also working on an interlinked radar chain to secure their own shores. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Mali is Hamdhan Shakeel. He is founder and editor at Maldives News Network. Uday Chandra is assistant professor of government at Georgetown University, Doha. He joins us from Split in Croatia. And joining us from New Delhi by Skype is Nitin Gokhale. He is CEO and editor-in-chief at Strategic News Global. Welcome to the program. Hamdhan, this ban on India Out, is it an attempt by the government to prevent hatred speech, or is it politically motivated?
Thank you for having me. The India Out campaign, I think it's a bit more complicated than simply just a political movement. The movement traces its origins all the way back to 2009, when India first decided to expand their defense grid to encompass even the Maldives territory. So it cannot be deemed as a simple political movement, and most certainly the current government is attempting to portray it as such, and in the process curtail some fundamental rights in the attempt to portray it as a political movement which is detrimental to the bilateral relations between both countries. But I don't think it would be accurate to say that the India movement is just a simple political movement.
Uday, the government is saying the reason why it is banning India Out because the campaign is widely seen as undermining relations with India. Others, on the other hand, say that this is just an attempt by the government to undermine the chances for Abdullah Yameen, the opposition leader, ahead of the next presidential elections.
I think there is some truth to it, but I have to say that in Maldives, as in Sri Lanka, these small states and the island states are trying to counterbalance India and China. And so I think for each of these governments, and even if the government changes, you see, as in Sri Lanka, they have to kind of milk both sides. They have to play both sides. And in some ways, yes, it is about preempting the opposition from doing the same thing, but that's the domestic aspect of it. But let's not forget there is the wider international relations of the Indian Ocean.
Okay. Nitin, what's the view in India? Is it seen as an attempt against the India First policy by President Mohammad Ibrahim Saleh?
Indeed, the view in India is that this is an opposition-sponsored move against the current government in Maldives. Because if it was initially India military out starting 2012, 2013, then it emerged into or sort of morphed into India Out campaign. And it is pointed out by the establishment both in Malé as well as in New Delhi that the former president Abdullah Yameen never protested against the US military pact that the Maldivians have gone and signed. So basically it is meant for domestic audience, it is meant for the upcoming elections, is the view. And India also does not view this as too widespread. Although President Soli's decision to ban the campaign is also seen as an overreaction in some quarters in India. So there are elements of, I would say, cussedness to both sides in this.
Hamdhan, the argument by the opposition that the reason why they launched the India Out campaign is their biggest concern about what they describe as the growing military presence of India in the archipelago. Is this something which is justified, or do you see it more of an exaggerated attempt by the opposition to blow the presence of India in the country out of proportion?
I don't think it is blown out of proportion as on 13 November 2021, the Defense Minister Maria Didi testified in front of the Parliament Committee on National Security Services, where she admitted that there is a large number of Indian military personnel in the Maldives, which up until that point had been denied by the government of Maldives, which is further testament to, which further gives testament to and credibility to the opposition's allegations that the current government is allowing India to indefinitely station their military personnel in the Maldives. And unlike other, we understand that in other nations, even there are foreign military bases which does not pose a threat to their sovereignty and independence. But what we have to understand here is that in this context, Maldives is unique in that we are a small island nation with very little natural resources. We have very little. Our defense force is vastly unequipped compared to our regional neighbors. So even the notion of stationing a few hundred soldiers, this poses an existential threat to Maldives as a sovereign nation.
Okay.
So this is the main concern that the opposition is raising. And I'd like to just highlight that contrary to what the current administration is portraying the opposition fueled India Out campaign as, it is in fact the largest political or none otherwise campaign in the Maldives since 2018. The largest five rallies in the Maldives has been a part of the India Out campaign. So there is public support for it, and their arguments are, I believe, is justified.
Okay, Nitin, is there any sentiment in India that this is not just a campaign sponsored by the opposition coalition in Maldives, but rather an attempt by the Chinese to stop the rise of Indians' influence in South Asia?
Oh, certainly. I mean, there is no doubt about it, at least in my mind, that behind the scene, the Chinese are instigating these protests and this campaign because they lost out. Remember, they were in full flow in Maldives when President Abdullah Yameen was in power. And he was completely in the Chinese camp, as is borne out by the events in that period. So they would certainly like to make a comeback because the current government has said that it is India first policy that it has adopted. And China would certainly like to reverse that policy by backing Abdullah Yameen and his supporters to come into power again. And this is one way of trying to make their way back to power. Elections are just one year away. And therefore, nobody in India is surprised with the timing and the tone and tenor of the campaign itself. At least in my mind, I have no doubt that this is Chinese-sponsored movement, largely financed by the Chinese, if not backed or physically done, physically participated by Chinese in Mali.
Uday, the world knows the archipelago as a tourism hub, but many are wondering how could this place become a battleground for China-India rivalry in the region?
Well, you know, the Chinese have a string of pearls strategy, which they've tried to implement. It's brought in Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and a number of other countries. It connects with their broader interests in East Africa and the Gulf, including Dubai and so on. And so I think India is a bit late to this game. It's realized that it has to kind of compete in a certain way. This is not a military competition or a directly economic competition, but there is a geopolitical kind of strategic dimension to it. It also has to do with whether governments are friendly to one or the other regional power. But you can see that there is a US-backed India as a counter to Chinese interests, which is, you know, in some ways in parallel to the Belt and Road initiative, which people have written much about.
Okay. Hamdhan, India has always had this privileged status with the Maldives. All that came to an end in 2013 when Abdullah Yameen came to power and said it's going to be now China first. Then 2018, Mohammed Ibrahim Saleh comes to power and then he says, no, it's going to be now India first. This shifting dynamic in the country with each president coming to power, is this something that could potentially undermine stability in the Maldives?
I don't think it was necessarily that it was a China first policy under President Abdullah Yameen, because as far as records go, it was under the current administration that the government of Maldives outright announced that it would take a side on regional politics. Up until that point, the Maldives had maintained an unaligned movement in regards to regional politics. But yes, did President Abdullah Yameen Gayoom's administration prefer trading with China? Yes, but according to the people I have interviewed and met so far, the Maldives did seek out alternative trade partners, including Japan and a few banks in Germany. But what the Chinese offered were, in terms of the interest rates and returns, it was just far more appealing than what India, Japan, and other countries offered. So obviously, in an attempt to maximize the infrastructure development much needed for the Maldives within just 5 years. President Abdullah Yamin chose to partner with China, but that does not mean that it's all one or the other. Even up until his end of his administration, he maintained diplomacy and he maintained dialogue with India, even though the situation worsened between both countries due to the singular fact that the Indian government refused to remove their military personnel in the Maldives, even after repeated requests by the Maldives Foreign Ministry, Maldives Defense Ministry, and according to recently leaked documents, the Indian military personnel in the Maldives attached to the Indian helicopters were formally requested to remove themselves, and following their refusal, their visas were even voided and asked to outright leave, but they did not. So this is the extent that India attempted to maintain their presence in the Maldives at the disapproval of the Maldivian government.
Nitin, I see your point. Nitin, you've just heard what Hamdhan has been saying about this growing sentiment in Maldives about the need for the Indian military personnel to leave the country. This is a country where where people are proud about their sense of independence, and they see military presence as something that undermines their sovereignty. Isn't India running the risk of losing the hearts and minds of the people in the Maldives in the future?
Well, I don't think so, because if you look at the number of military exchanges that happen, military exercises, joint patrolling of the seas around Maldives, military exchanges between the two armed forces, and the number of people who train, Maldivian armed forces personnel who train in India, in the Indian military institutions, I don't think that risk of losing hearts and minds of the people exists, because one section of the population, which is the supporters of probably the current opposition, might feel it that way, but the Indian military personnel and the Indian military platforms are in Maldives at the invitation of the Maldives government. So while the government will say that we are getting training from the Indian military personnel, and a similar pact exists with the United States, where there is no protest against the provisions and the provisions of the pact itself with the US. A similar pact, perhaps with India, will attract more opposition from the current opposition, because it has a history with the Indian government. And while India will play the cards as it needs to, as the situation develops, the fact is, in Maldives, governments have sided with one country or the other, like China, and then again India comes back into a position of influence. That continues in smaller nations around India, and India is aware of this.
Uday, so you have this ban on India out campaign. Before that, the government was adamant about the need to introduce a new legislation which was going to ban any organization or campaign seen as a threat to Maldives' foreign policy or the country's foreign relations with foreign countries. Are we here dealing with a government determined to continue to clamp down on freedom of expression?
I'm not sure I would necessarily see it in those terms, but I think, yes, it is, freedom of expression in all of South Asia at this point is a massive concern. And this is a concern because people are upset, they're expressing their grievances towards governments that do not deliver on democratic mandates. And so we've reached a point where we have democracies, at least in name. Elections happen in regular cycles, but regardless of who comes to power, a set of grievances persist. So we find this now. You see it in Sri Lanka, you see it in Pakistan recently. You see it in situations where the political system is unable to deal with the demands that are coming in. There are grievances which cannot be met, and then there are crackdowns on political expression and speech.
Uday, Abdullah Yameen, when he was president of Maldives, took all the measures to stifle dissent, clamp down on his opponents. Isn't there a risk that he could be just triggering the campaign to further his political ambition and secure a comeback to power?
I agree with that assessment. That is, this is really his path back to power. But let's keep in mind that he can launch this campaign because there exists a certain body of anti-India sentiment within the Maldives today. And he is able to tap into this. It's not something that he's just creating out of thin air. We have to realize that the islands are divided, just like the political parties are divided into India and China facing kind of camps. And I think that with a lot of younger people in the Maldives, I think there is a sense that the long-standing kind of ties with India need to be reassessed. China is, of course, one factor, but I do think that there is a broader kind of rethinking also with respect to Modi's India.
Okay. Hamdhan, this is a country that historically knew how to navigate its way surrounded by some geopolitical powerhouses. Now you have the Americans stepping in 2020 with a defense framework agreement. Is this the opportunity for the people of the Maldives to say that now, faced with the Chinese, the Indians, and the Americans, it's about time to reinvent the way we have to deal with great powers?
I think the world is changing, and the whole of South Asia will be a key point of interest in the coming years. And so, yes, I do believe that Maldives itself needs to reassess its foreign policy of non-alignment and assess whether we need to take a definite side in the broader view of the world in dealing with international relations. But on the subject of the India campaign itself, I'd like to just note that contrary to what Mr. Nitin has noted, the India Out campaign is not talking about the defense cooperation between both countries. It's not talking about India and Maldives conducting joint military exercises. It is talking about a series of military agreements which, under the current constitution of Maldives, is illegal, and yet the current administration refuses to adopt transparency and reveal to the parliament, as stipulated in Article 251C of the parliament constitution of Maldives, which states that no foreign military, no territory of the Maldives may be used by a foreign military without the express approval of the majority of the parliament. So this is where the real issue is. This is not about anti-Indian sentiments in the Maldives being created overnight. This is not about Maldivians being seemingly against people of Indian origin. This is about a singular issue, the stationing of Indian military personnel in Maldives under questionable circumstances.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We'll have to leave it there. But for the time being, Hamdhan, Shakeel, Uday, Chandra, and Nitin, Gokhale, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.